Pope Francis has shocked the world at the age of 87, not with a decree or a sermon, but with one last, very private request. The Vatican allegedly attempted to prevent the request from ever being made public, since it was so contentious. Why would the Church want it buried? What could possibly be so shocking? We're breaking the hush today. This headline isn't your typical one. Raw, unvarnished, and full of secrets, this historical moment has shook the Vatican's holiest corridors. Pope Francis, who is 87 years old, and the most contentious and progressive pope of our time, is said to have made a deeply personal, emotional, and spiritually charged final request. But it's not simply what he asked that has people all across the world scratching their heads. It is the silence of the Vatican. Why would they seek to stifle the world's most influential religious leader's final request? What was it that he asked that was so delicate and disturbing that it was not suitable for public consumption? We are going deep in this video. You'll discover the specifics of Pope Francis's last request, the reasons behind the alleged disagreement among Vatican insiders on its observance, and the potential implications of this event for the Catholic Church's future. But before we dive into the specifics, be ready, this is not just an emotional story, it's explosive. Let's go back a couple of months. Subtle hints that something was happening behind the scenes started to surface from sources close to the Vatican. Something really intimate and perhaps disturbing. These were not your typical rumors of doctrinal disputes or political conflicts. Clergy and aides who have worked for Pope Francis for years whispered numbers. Persons who spoke of a change in his soul. Although he has experienced health concerns, they claimed that the Pope appeared to be burdened by an unsaid burden, rather than by age or disease. Those around him sensed that he was clinging to something. Then the pivotal moment arrived. With a small number of his most trusted confidants, the Pope held a private off-the-record meeting inside Casa Santa Marta, his home. Just words uttered slowly, deliberately, and deeply, no cameras, no official recordings. According to an unnamed insider, the atmosphere in the room was profoundly somber, as if we were watching something holy and prohibited. This report claims that Pope Francis made a very precise desire about his own demise. However, it had nothing to do with sainthood, legacy, or the destiny of the Church. It had to do with his funeral, or more precisely, the place and manner of his non-desired burial. According to insiders, the room was left in shock when he allegedly said, "Do not lay me beneath the marble. Do not lock me inside the tradition that I have spent my life trying to renew. My rest must be with the people, not above them." Some glanced away, unwilling to answer, while others nodded reverently. However, one thing was evident. Pope Francis wasn't being egotistical when he made this request. It was a last act of modesty. A final words from a guy who has defied more convention than any pope in contemporary history. This is where things become fascinating, though. Something changed, and not in the way you might think, when those statements left that room and made their way to the ears of the Vatican's senior officials and traditionalists. The Vatican repressed this desire rather than granting it. Restrictions were placed on communications on the Pope's remarks. It is said that those who discussed the meeting received warnings. When journalists inquired as to whether such a request had been made, the Vatican press office remained silent. What precisely are they attempting to conceal then? Why would they be afraid of an elderly Pope's funeral wishes? And is it possible that even in death, his last deed is viewed as too radical for the venerable Church to embrace? Following rumors regarding Pope Francis's, when a strange request for a funeral started making the rounds, something even more startling was revealed. The Pope's final desires were not expressed in a public will or doctrinal edict, but rather in a handwritten letter that was signed, dated, and sealed inside the Apostolic House, according to an anonymous Vatican assistant. Unless the Church disregarded him, this was a private and intimate message that was not intended for the general public. Those who have seen the text say it extends well beyond the place of burial. It is said to be a plea, a warning, and a confession all at once. Let me explain it to you. Pope Francis is said to have expressed his increasing displeasure with the lavishness that has come to characterize certain aspects of the Catholic hierarchy in the letter. In his writing, he expresses his concern that the Church is becoming too disconnected from the underprivileged, the disenfranchised, and the actual people it was established to help. In addition to using the phrase golden tombs as a metaphor, he also warns of the actual practice of burying popes in opulent crypts underneath churches. If I must die as a servant of Christ, let me return to the dust as one, not in a sarcophagus, but on the soil of the forgotten, something that millions of believers cannot. According to reports, the statement caused unease inside the Curia, the Vatican's executive body. particularly among traditionalists, who believe that the pomp of papal funerals is necessary to uphold hallowed tradition. But the silent fight started here. Vatican insiders started to push back strongly, you see. High-ranking cardinals contended that France's proposal for a funeral would create a risky precedent and challenge centuries of papal tradition and power. The Vatican press office has yet to acknowledge the letter's existence, claiming that one even said, "If he is buried among the poor, the church will lose its head." However, a number of leaks indicate that steps were taken to stifle it, including securing it, limiting access, and perhaps even crafting a more palatable statement to go against Francis's actual wishes. Take a moment to process that. A sitting pope, the most adored reformer in modern history, is having his last desires contested, and perhaps even buried before he dies. The strangest thing, though, comes next. What, then, was Pope Francis's last shocking request? Pope Francis requested not to be buried in Vatican City at all, according to one Jesuit priest, whose identity is being kept secret out of concern for religious retaliation. The children nicknamed him Padre Jorge, and the air smelled of dust rather than incense. Instead, he asked to be buried at a little cemetery in Argentina, close to the slums, where he had once wandered as a plain priest. I'll say it again. The voice of over 1 billion Catholics, the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of the Vatican, and the impoverished all want to go back to the dirt roads of Buenos Aires. No gilded crypt, no marble grave, no worldwide funeral procession. The folks who showed me what God looks like are the ones I want buried with. This is the purported letter. However, this is where the situation becomes even more intricate. When it comes to papal deaths, the Vatican controls the narrative. There is choreography in every aspect. A pope cannot opt to remain anonymous when it comes to the clothing or public demonstrations of grief. The church, not the man, chooses the final resting place. And Francis was arguing just that point. With one last act of humility, he is attempting to rewrite centuries of pageantry. Let's not be naive, though. Location isn't the only factor here. It has to do with power. According to Vatican-affiliated sources, this desire might lead to a worldwide crisis of tradition. Conservative leaders worry that the demise of religious traditions will be signaled if Francis is buried, without the dignity of a papal tomb. However, progressive theologians are referring to it as a prophetic act, a last sermon that is given with a shovel rather than a microphone. There are even rumors that some Vatican groups are trying to stop the proposal completely. A compromise burial, symbolically modest but yet inside the Vatican, has been suggested by some. However, this is the unexpected turn of events. Francis mentored a high-ranking bishop in Argentina years ago, and he verified a few weeks ago that a burial had already been prepared. Discreetly, without fanfare, with a simple plot, without markings, without publicity, and without pictures. Was Francis responsible for this? Or was it the bishop's homage to the man who, with just 2 shoes, a bag, and a desire to help the forgotten, changed the church? Conspiracy theories start at this point. Some of them don't sound so unrealistic, to be honest. Because what if the Vatican doesn't simply turn down his request? What if they completely remove it? Let's now discuss what the Vatican would prefer you not to know. Over the course of its 2,000-year history, the Catholic Church has mastered one thing: narrative control. The Vatican makes sure that every phrase, image, and ritual is in line with the institution and not the individual, whether it is forming theology, curating sainthood, or overseeing papal changes. Pope Francis's extreme desire to be buried in his own Argentina, rather than Rome, therefore raised more than just eyebrows. It set out concerns. According to one insider, a former Vatican communications officer, top-level officials now discuss Francis' burial in a classified manner. We're talking about meetings behind closed doors, phones being seized, and records being withheld. According to the insider, there is a genuine concern that complying with this request will create a precedent. What will happen if Pope Francis passes away and is buried outside the Vatican? Could this be interpreted as a rejection of the papal legacy and a condemnation of centuries of tradition? The situation becomes murkier, though, as some Vatican observers think Francis has already had his request fulfilled, including having his private correspondence and discussions about his funeral plans sealed or destroyed on the grounds of doctrinal protection. And here's the thing. An anonymous cardinal allegedly said during a recent synod, if his body leaves Rome, the soul of the church might follow. That's not just poetic, it's political. For many in the church, Francis has been more than just a reformer, he's been a threat. His papacy has continuously pushed boundaries that conservative factions vowed never to cross. from supporting divorced Catholics to opposing capitalism, from washing the feet of Muslim refugees to calling out clerical abuse. It may be his most audacious move to date, but let's take a step back and ask a crucial question. If this is his final wish, why hasn't the Vatican publicly addressed it? Is it because they're buying time, or are they waiting for him to pass away so they can silently override his last plea? You see, there's a clause buried deep within the Vatican Constitution that's rarely discussed. This is where it gets chilling. The Pope has no successor until he is buried, so any controversy surrounding his death and burial could potentially delay the election of the next Pope, creating a leadership void in the Church and a global crisis. Trust me, the Church is not willing to take that chance. According to a leaked memo, purportedly written by a congregation member for the doctrine of the faith, the document outlined 3 potential courses of action. In the event that Francis' burial wishes were made public, deny the request's legitimacy, and declare it a media fabrication. You won't believe how far the implications of Pope Francis's request have spread. Downplay his words, portraying them as the sentimental thoughts of an elderly pope. Override the request in the name of upholding church tradition and papal dignity. The worst part is that the memo was dated 6 months ago. You have to ask yourself how long the Vatican has known about this, and more importantly, how long they have been trying to bury it. It's not just rocking the Vatican, it's rocking the capitals of the world, because what happens when the world's most powerful religious leader, the leader of 1.3 billion Catholics, declines to be buried in Rome, where all previous popes have been buried for more than a millennium? That's where this story becomes truly global. According to sources close to the president's office in Buenos Aires and behind closed doors, the government is reportedly planning a potential state funeral if the Pope's request is granted. It's unprecedented for a sitting or recently deceased Pope to have a funeral in Argentina. Leaked diplomatic cables reveal that South American leaders are privately pushing for Pope Francis to be buried in his native country, arguing that it would be a sign of spiritual inclusivity, Latin American pride, and global humility. If the Pope is buried outside of Rome, it could break centuries of unity between the Church and the Holy See, said a former European ambassador to the Vatican. But not everyone shares this opinion. It's more than just where he sleeps. Let's now examine Italy, where Italian nationalists who have strong ties to Rome's symbolic role as the cradle of the Church have responded angrily. If you're wondering why this is so serious, it's because Pope Francis's final wish isn't just personal, it's political. Some far-right leaders have publicly declared that honoring Francis's request would be seen as betraying the sanctity of Rome. One politician even referred to it as a final act of rebellion from a pope who was never fully Roman. Here's where it gets even more dramatic. A number of international leaders, including 2 from the G7, have allegedly encouraged the Vatican to take into account how Francis' burial location would affect Christian unity across continents. It's cultural, and it's spiritual warfare at the highest level. How can Rome claim to lead the faithful in life if it cannot keep its pope in death? Reportedly stated one Eastern European politician in private. Let that sink in. However, there's more. Scholars from Islamic institutions, Protestant denominations, and Orthodox churches have all offered their opinions, albeit behind closed doors, rather than publicly. Why? Because, whether or not you agree with his theology, Pope Francis has become a global religious figure that transcends Catholicism, and his actions, including this one, are seen as symbolic for all faith traditions, navigating contemporary crises. Furthermore, within the Catholic Church, this may not only be about scandals involving abuse or theology, but also about how the Church deals with death, legacy, and leadership succession. It's not just about the Pope's burial, though, as conservative bishops are reportedly drafting letters to the College of Cardinals asking them to ignore France's last request for the sake of the Church. One Italian bishop reportedly told his congregation, "If this Pope chooses exile and death, we must choose Rome and life." A few cardinals are quietly considering proposing a new law that would legally require all popes to be buried within Vatican territory, beginning immediately after Francis. This proposal is currently in secret discussions, but if it passes, it would mean that the very institution he led would deny Francis' final wish. This is the most absurd aspect of the debate over who will control the Church's future. Let's pause to think carefully about what Pope Francis is requesting. The Pope, who was once adored and criticized in equal measure, is now standing on the edge of eternity, with a final wish that has ignited centuries of tradition. How will the faithful respond to this? Will it strengthen the Church or ultimately tear it apart? A marble tomb in the Apostolic Palace. a shrine beneath St. Peter's Basilica, or even the right to be remembered in gold or grandeur are not what he is requesting. Rather, he is requesting to be remembered as a humble man, a sinner like the rest of us, a servant who walked with the poor, fought corruption, and never gave up on the forgotten. Pope Francis is choosing to stand with the people even in death, by refusing to be buried in the Vatican, sending a final message to the Church, the faithful, and history itself: do not exalt me. This is why his final request is so powerful, despite the efforts of powerful forces both inside and outside the Church to silence him. One thing is certain, though: will the Vatican honor this dying wish? Will the cardinals permit such a significant break in tradition, or will they, as they have so often done in the past, brush it under the rug for the sake of power, symbolism, and control? Let me return to the soil of my people. What I want you to do is leave a comment below. Should Pope Francis be buried in Argentina as he requested, or should tradition be honored at the Vatican? If this video made you think, if it gave you a new perspective, hit the like button so that more people can hear this story. This is not just about a funeral. It's about the future of the Catholic Church, whether the institution will finally bow to humility or break under the weight of its own resistance to change. Because often the most powerful legacy is the one they tried hardest to hide. Don't forget to subscribe for more bombshell revelations, untold truths, and tales the mainstream media won't cover.